How's it going, guys? Can you guys see my screen okay? Let's see. Okay, cool. I think we should be good. How's everyone doing tonight? If you guys wouldn't mind, just giving me a quick confirmation you guys can see everything okay, sound okay. Anything would be great, just so I can make sure, you know, we are good to go. Screen's visible. Okay, cool. Good to know. We'll go ahead and give, a couple minutes to hopefully let some more people in here before we get started. How's everyone's Monday been? Hopefully, hopefully good. Um, so today, we're gonna be doing a work in progress stream. Going to take a look at a couple of people who sent over some work, and we'll see how many we get through. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll be able to get through all of them. Hopefully we will, maybe, but it really kind of just depends the pace that I start moving at. Unfortunately, my dog is sitting here staring at me like, hey, can you stop working, because you've just been working all day, can you please stop? So as long as we are not interrupted, um which there's a high probability that we will be, we should be good. So what we're going to do here today is usually during these streams, I like to just take some people's work in progress, give some kind of similar feedback like I would give or receive during production. Um, Things that are standing out to me that could use some work, that could just help improve on things. Overall, a lot of this stuff is partially subjective, some of it's objective, if there's anatomy issues or things like that. But sometimes I call out things in terms of choices that I would make that may be a little bit different than the choices you made. Now, with stuff like that, again, that is more subjective. So you might listen to me and think, you're dumb. I don't want to do what you said. That's totally fine. You are entitled to, do what you want with your artwork and stuff, and those subjective things, just keep those in mind. But that being said, overall, a lot of this stuff that I give feedback on, I think a lot of this stuff is applicable to a lot of people, not just the work in the work that I am directly giving the feedback to. There's a lot of things that I think, are repeated issues between different people's artworks, mine included. Some of the feedback that I will give is things that I have struggled with in the past, or things that just stand out to me because I'm more attuned to those being issues because I've gotten feedback on them. So that's kind of what I like to do here. Obviously, as per usual, if you guys have any questions, you guys are more than welcome to ask. I will try my best to keep an eye on the chat just to, keep engaged with that. But for the most part, I want to just try and, get through as much as I can, hopefully, and see, where that takes us. So with that said, we have 11 people in here so far. Hopefully, some more trickle in. If not, it's totally fine. This will be up on the channel to watch later. But we're going to jump right in. So the first people that we have up are going to be the senior members from the channel. They always get priority on these things. So the first one that we have is Alex, which he is in here. Let me pull up what you said, Alex. Uh Goals to make it like Thanos meets God of War vibe. Been working with Jay a lot on the larger shape, overall detail, and general approach to the bones. Still adding a few plane changes to the bone, making a clear concept. Face and body still need scars and other details. Okay, cool. So with this concept, one of the first things that really stands out to me is the overall stylization of the piece. Now, for me, I think that that's going to be one of the biggest things that I would probably have some feedback on currently, is because this piece is so stylized. What you're going to see is you're going to see a lot of very intentional angles and directional changes, right? This guy's meant to feel very like big, brooding, hard and chiseled, right? So you have a lot of sharp angles that really kind of reinforce a lot of that in the language that you're seeing, right? So especially in like the anatomy and things like that, you have really sharp angular lines and plane changes. So we have some of that here in our silhouette, especially in this 3/4 angle. But what we're seeing is we're not actually doing as much plane changing as we are kind of just rounding forms, right? So that's something that I would like to like for you to try and, you know, observe the concept a little bit more, right? So if we come over here, same thing with this form. Where's my thing? We have sharp line, sharp line, sharp line, sharp line. But over here on the bicep, very rounded. And then even as it kind of tapers down, we're still kind of seeing some of that roundedness. Once we get up here into this view, you can see rounded, 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 rounded. So what we're starting to get is we're getting kind of a Michelin man sort of look to the anatomy, right? Feels very rounded and bulbous. And so what we really want to try and do is if we take this guy, duplicate it, and what we're going to do is just with a black and white, we're just going to kind of come in and try and like form some of those plane changes a little bit more intentionally so they're not quite as bulbous, right? And especially like up here in the underarm, that's going to be an area where you're really going to want to work to define, and the deltoid. The deltoid shouldn't be a shape like this, but you're going to want to have kind of this sort of plane building on it. So if we look, you don't really get a good understanding of how the deltoid looks from that front perspective. But if you're rounding it out like that, it feels like Superman shoulders or something. Feels a little bit odd. So I'm just going to like take a little bit off of here and then kind of just form the shape like that. So it's not a huge change, but it's just kind of shaving a little bit off so we get a little bit of a cleaner understanding of those plane changes, and so it's a little bit less Michelin man-esque. One other area too, and again, this is mainly based on the fact that we're seeing it from this 3/4 angle, and I can see that you're trying to match some of this here, is going to be the silhouette that we're seeing over here, right? So one of the things that's really interesting with this guy is if we look at right here, we have, I'm drawing on the wrong layer. We have this shape, but then we have this negative space right here that separates what's going on right here from this horn, right? So that's going to be something that we're going to want to start to see separation from. We have a real big kind of like a loss of volume on what's going on right here. It's just kind of this straight flat line that falls into this, and we don't have any separation between those forms right there. So I would like to see that, because I think that that is just an important feature to the skull kind of overhanging on top of this hood, and it creates a nice little separation between those elements. Aside from that, I think everything else is kind of headed in the right direction. These shin pads, these are coming off of the form, which right here, we don't really get much separation, and we get this like really deep swoop. If you look here, it's not actually as swoopy as it kind of looks. So I might reduce that and then just try and bring it so it's breaking that silhouette a little bit more from the 3/4 angle. Personally, when I am posing characters and things like that, especially with something like this, since his pose is so strong in an A, I might spread his legs out just a little bit more naturally to kind of fit that pose, since, you know, well, depending on how you're going about it. If you're planning on like rigging this, maybe just keep it this way. But if you're planning on like taking the model and transposing it after the fact, and, you know, bringing the arms down and getting everything into position, which is what I would do, I might just naturally kind of sculpt the legs a little bit wider so that you can kind of pick up some of these forms on the leg and some of this silhouette and stuff like that. So that is probably some of the main feedback in terms of the silhouette. On the head, some of those angular changes, I would probably also push a little bit more, really kind of push some of that separation between the forehead into the eyebrow bone, kind of like what you have here. There's a really defined separation between the cheeks and the nasal labial fold. And then also, if we look up here, there is going to be kind of this pushed out sort of structure to the chin. So I might try and introduce a little bit of that. Right now, it's just very straight. So if we can get a little bit more of that pushed out upper lip and then drop into the chin, it'll just push the silhouette a little bit further. But overall, there's some good personality to the character on the face. I think that the forms are looking pretty cool. I would also just mention, really like look at like some of the planes on here, and if you can introduce any of those just a little bit crisper, might help with the overall stylization just a little bit. But depending on the style that you're going for, you probably don't have to push it too far. You definitely have some here. These kind of big wrinkles, is that in the concept? That's not really in the concept. This kind of feels a little bit too I don't know what's the word for it. Too manufactured, because like you're getting pill, and pill, and they're all kind of the same shape. So what I would do is I would just kind of create that natural separation and then just have the separation flowing with the form and not like be separated into thirds like that. And I think it might feel a little bit more natural as well. So yeah, I think that that's kind of the main feedback that I have in the stuff that I'm seeing is really just keep an eye on that silhouette. I think the proportions are working pretty well. His legs, depending on how they look in this position, I would just double check the like width and the thickness of them, which from this front perspective looks pretty good. So yeah, I think that that's kind of the main feedback that I have, is really just keeping an eye on this silhouette, see where you can really amplify some of the stuff, like these negative spaces and things like that, and, find some ways to push them. And then the anatomy, we want to avoid that, the Michelin Man feel, sphere, and sphere, where it feels too bulbous. I apologize for that drawing. That was me drawing with a mouse instead of my tablet. Okay, so let's look at the next one. So this one's Zach. Let's see what I think for right now. I just want to get a better idea for the lighting of this guy. I'm really struggling with that. Okay, cool. Well, I will provide some feedback on the lighting, but also I do have some notes on just the overall model. One thing that's kind of standing out to me, at least like right here, a lot of this stuff kind of looks like the normal map is inverted or something. The way it's lit, the way it's textured, something is feeling kind of odd here. So I would just double check that, because it's feeling a little bit odd from this view. Now, one thing that I did want to call out in terms of just like the overall modeling and stuff, this sort of shape and this sort of shape, those feel really, really unnatural. If you were to look at like how an animal actually grows, plating or things like that, they do grow on the backside of a character, like the back or whatever, but they usually have a gradation off, so from like a scale being really big to like smaller scales, and as they like transition to even smaller scales and things like that. Right now with this, as you can see, it's just very, very harsh on all of this. So we're just getting a harsh termination and no transition between these elements. no transitions is essentially like you going from primary forms to tertiary forms, and it feels like it's missing that secondary form in between to bridge the gap between the detail that you're seeing here and here. So I would recommend giving another pass on that. Obviously, that means going back to the high poly, but I think that that would be more impactful than just leaving it as is, because right now it feels like partly incomplete, and it feels, because it feels incomplete, it feels like out of place. And again, you can have these elements, but I think that there needs to be something else to like bridge the gaps in these areas so it feels a little bit more complete. And then let's see. Okay, so in terms of the textures, I did have a couple of notes. Let's see, what is this guy's name? Greymon or something like that. I'm not a Digimon person, but I am partly familiar. Okay, cool. So let's see, is this him? This guy? Okay. So the first thing that I would call out just in terms of like the coloring and stuff is you might be able to push him a little bit more towards like the orange. Right now he's a little bit gray, or not even gray, like kind of odd brown color. You could find a way to add some like orange patterning in here to kind of help sell these big broad surfaces, because right now all I'm seeing is like this brown color pretty much throughout with a blue stripe here and there. And you know, the blue stripe's fine, that's like a nice little accent color, but they're, again, going back to the same sort of feedback that I had about the scales, is it feels like we're missing kind of that bridging gap between the two. So we just have like all this kind of brown sort of color, earth tones, and then we have the stripe. So we don't have anything in between there to bridge those gaps. So what I would recommend doing is, you can kind of see a little bit of it here. You have some of this kind of lightning right here as it transitions into a little bit of a darker color, but there's not really much else going on to it. So I think for the textures, I would try and just give another pass on that to get a little bit more of that in between of your primary colors and your secondary colors, and then into your tertiary colors. Now in terms of the lighting, right now I think that the biggest offender is you are capturing some forms, but like your highlight is kind of up here, and all the rest of the stuff down here kind of becomes neutral. There's not really much selling anything down here. So what I would recommend doing, and this is a little bit more tricky because dinosaurs, like this angle, this is not a great angle for showing off your character, mainly because you're obscuring so much of the model. I think cropping into the head like this, as if you were going to do a shot like this, is fine, but showing the whole body like that is a little bit weird, just because there's so much of the silhouette that is up and down and there's nothing else to it really. And then you have like these things coming off, but there's really not much going on composition wise on this one. So obviously this is work in progress stuff, but I would even say same sort of thing with this one. Like there is a little bit more of an action line, but I don't think that this really does much to present the model. I would probably turn this one like a 3/4 angle this way so that you're getting more of the silhouette of the head and more of the full body, but this lower angle is pretty cool. But this one, I think that this one is also kind of flattening out the model too. So I would just play around with some of your composition on those. Now, in terms of the lighting, like I said, the lighting is going to be a little bit hard. I think that up here you're getting too strong of light on this rim light, so you're getting a lot of stuff kind of washed out from this backside. And then down here, you don't have any light really selling the rim light on here on the backside. So what I would do is, let's see if I can do this without making myself look dumb. Let's go to screen. Maybe we'll try and paint some light in here. So you have a little bit going on here. I'm gonna do maybe like 50%. Maybe something like 25% instead. So we'll do this, and then I would just recommend like trying to get some light on the backside of these. Same thing with these wings, because like right now they're falling into shadow right down here. So if you're gonna backlight a character, you don't want all this stuff getting lost to shadow, which this doesn't really look great. So yeah, this one's gonna be a little bit tricky to light. But point being, there is a lot of stuff that could use some accent lighting back here. The brown background I also don't think really helps. I would try and find something maybe a little bit more neutral, like a blue or something. Might help, but I don't think the brown background's really helping too much either. So yeah, that's kind of the general feedback that I have on it. Lighting wise, too much focus up here, not really enough going on down here. In terms of like the lighting on these ones, the lighting is just flattening out this entire side. This one, there's a little bit more shadowing going on, but because of the angle, I feel like it's not really doing it too much. So yeah, I would just, play with getting some more fill lights in here. Really try and accentuate like the highlights on the metal. Figure out where your key light's coming from. The positioning of the light might also not be helping it right now. It kind of seems like it's like coming from right here. So maybe you need to do one from up here and try and play with different lighting positions and stuff. But stick to a 3-point lighting setup. That'll make your life a lot easier. But really, the biggest thing is gonna just be changing the background color. I think that this one's really not helping it. It's too much brown and too much earth tones. Something a little bit cooler will help this guy pop off the background a little bit more. So, okay, let's go to our next one. So let's see. This one is looking pretty cool. Let's see. Let's look at the concept. Okay. So, right off the bat, I think overall headed in a pretty good direction. There is a couple of things sticking out to me silhouette wise that I would call out. I think primarily the first area that I'm kind of seeing is the distance of the shoulders. These are feeling very shoulder patty. So if I was to draw where like the tip of the shoulder is, or where the actual joint is, it looks pretty far over, which her rib cage is right about here, so it kind of feels like her shoulders are dislocated from her body, which obviously you can exaggerate some of that stuff, but I think that look is ultimately amplified by how far out these are coming, which if we look here, the shoulder pads really aren't that distinct of a silhouette break on here. So what I would recommend doing is, where is it? This guy. Let's duplicate this. And what we're going to do is we're just going to take this and we're just going to kind of shave a little bit down on these guys, so they are not quite as broad. So what you would ultimately do is just, move this in a little bit more so it doesn't stick out quite as far. And then also what would probably help is you can see this line that you have right here. This is really kind of amplifying that look that you have, because it's like when you look at like the stitching on shoulders and stuff, usually you're going to end up more kind of like right here at the tip point of the actual shoulder. So I would take all of this and just kind of nudge it over a little bit. Oh, I'm over here duplicating layers. I don't want to duplicate. I would just nudge this way so it falls a little bit more in line with the actual shoulder. And I think that that would help overall on the like broadness of the character. Aside from that, I think that the jacket looks pretty cool. I would recommend on this guy just coming in and taking some of this in so it feels like this is actually cinching on the jacket. So then it's kind of breaking up this silhouette a little bit more. It feels like it's not just like a thing that's been tied to it that's kind of floating there. This leads to a little bit more contact interaction between objects and just overall would help the silhouette a little bit more. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, we'll leave that there. What am I doing? I'm hitting the wrong buttons. Not a Photoshop expert. Okay, cool. So the rest of the costume and stuff I think is looking pretty cool. I don't have too many concerns or points of feedback, I think, in terms of what's going on here. I would say the hard surface elements feel a little plain as they currently stand. Kind of just feels, at least from this shot, like they're just like metal plate. There's not really much design behind them, whereas like when I look over here, this looks kind of like they're sitting on top of each other, but like there is a plane going this way on them that feels like they're overlapping in a certain way that feels a little bit more cohesive. When we look at yours, what you have right now, it all just kind of feels like one solid thing and then just slapped on, and then slapped on. So I would look at maybe just finding a little bit more integration between those elements and seeing if that, you know, works a little bit more with the overall hard surface design portion. I think that the rest of the stuff is looking pretty cool. Down here on the legs, kind of the same thing that I was talking about up here. One massive thing that I usually see a lot of people struggle with or do is what I like to call the noodle arm syndrome. And they make all of their characters, you know, with their jacket, and they're like, okay, cool, like look at this jacket, it has a nice silhouette. But in reality, this is kind of what the silhouette is, right? Like the arms are very straight and tubular, and then the legs are also very straight and tubular. So when we have that, we want to find opportunities to break or push that silhouette a little bit more. And I think what you have in the top half up here is looking pretty good. But down here is where we really kind of start to fall in, and especially on this inside of the leg where it kind of feels super straight, doesn't feel like there's really much going on in here. And don't get me wrong, I recognize that the concept kind of emphasizes that a little bit more, but from a 3D perspective, what I would do is I would just push the silhouette on this guy, on this guy a little bit more and create some like interest in the silhouette with some of these wrinkles down at the bottom so that it feels not just like a tubular shoe that is on the character. So overall, I think it's looking pretty solid. It's really just going to be about that, and then maybe coming up here and trying to maybe pull some of these shapes in, some of this bunching, if you can. It looks like right here is a strap, which what I might recommend is possibly just bringing this strap up a little bit and adding some kind of cloth bunching out in order to, again, help that silhouette a little bit more on this bottom part of the leg. So very subtle. Even like right here, you could probably push it just a little bit more so that we are over emphasizing just a little bit. You don't want to go too crazy, but you want to have a little bit more just to break up these two straight lines so they're not quite as parallel. Okay, let's see. So in terms of the face, uh, what happened to it? There it is. I think the face is looking pretty good so far. The main thing that I would call out is just very symmetrical currently, which isn't a terrible thing. But I would get a little bit more asymmetry on the lips and then maybe a little bit of asymmetry on the eyes, because right now, looking at this, everything is pretty much symmetrical. And if there is asymmetry on here, I'm not really seeing it. And you just want to have a little bit in here, because if not, it kind of looks a little uncanny once you get the textures on here. The other thing that I wanted to call out in this, I think, is partly an optical illusion, because we're seeing like the darks right here on the painted eye. But the illusion that it's giving me is that this eye's pointed this way and this eye's pointed this way. Just be careful with that once you actually do get the eyes placed in here, because it's kind of creating like an illusion of like just the eyes aren't facing in the correct direction. And I think because of that, it's kind of pulling the overall like eye shape down a little bit. So again, this is more just a note based on the fact that I think that the painting of the eye is not helping the illusion of them from my first glance. So if I was to like, really kind of rectify that with actual pupils, I think that helps. But just something to keep an eye on, once you actually get the eyes in there and stuff, you want to make sure that they're not drifting apart. But overall, solid work, looking cool. But I think that just silhouette wise, that's kind of my main feedback on things, which has been a reoccurring theme. So on to our next one. Okay, cool. So, overall, pretty solid looking stuff. Not a ton of things jumping out at me right away. Let's see. We're missing a pouch on here, which I would recommend getting this guy in here. The reason for that is because right now the balance of things is pretty equal, and what's causing that is you have both of these lines, and then you do have a little bit of asymmetry here, but you also have this thing here, and you have this small thing here. There's a lot of, it feels very balanced because of just the distribution of stuff. So I think getting that bigger object here will help break up that balance a little bit more. It'll make it feel a little bit more interesting and a little bit more unique, especially because the majority of the character is very symmetrical, especially like the knee pads. And as we're getting down, into this area, we're starting to see kind of the same thing that I was talking about earlier with the straight line effect, the noodle arm effect, where like both of these lines from a silhouette perspective are very, very straight, which in the concept they are. So any opportunity to kind of push that, the better. So let's see if we can do a little before and after. And what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of push some of this here, push some of this guy a little bit. Get a little bit in here. So getting some of that. You have some of it down here. I might just like emphasize it a little bit more on some of these outer edges. Just getting a little bit more on here so that it feels like there is a compression from these knee pads. So you can see really, really subtle, but it does just add a little bit of improvement to the overall silhouette. And then moving down into the leg, I would say this is another example of where things just feel very parallel, right? So what we could do to hopefully improve this is we could just kind of bring this shape flaring out a little bit more. on both sides so that we get a more of a curve to it and less of a straight taper. So here on the concept, it's pretty straight. I think where they accomplish more of the silhouette changes down here, so you could do that by really kind of emphasizing that bottom half of the shoe, where right now if you look at like the toe box, it's very, very square. So by bringing out and flaring it, now you're getting a shoe that looks a little more interesting and less straight. So that's kind of the main feedback that I would say on the costume. I think the rest of the stuff's looking pretty cool. The tire and stuff, I feel like right now it's looking okay. I think one thing that I would recommend doing is just coming in here and kind of knocking back some of these edges so that the shape isn't quite as perfect. Really kind of emphasize some of these chunks that are missing. Because right now you have a solid primary shape, right? But that's kind of where it stops, is you have the primary shape and you don't really have much irregularities on that shape. So any opportunity to kind of pull a secondary shape in here on the silhouette, I think would help the overall look of it. And same thing for up here on these guys. They feel very perfect, and perfection is bad. We don't want perfection in our characters, because perfection feels, perfect, and perfect is boring and it feels CG. So I don't know. Just keep that in mind. Now in terms of the face, same sort of feedback as the last one. I would just recommend getting some asymmetry on here. Also, this face is very, very angular and planar, so you have some really kind of drastic plane changes on here from the side profile, like the lips. Really observe some of these strong, sharp lines and find where you can pull some of those plane changes in on your work. Because right now, if we look at it, there's a lot of kind of soft features, like this line is very, very soft, whereas we could kind of bring this out a little bit more and really kind of push some of that angularity on the face, and then down here on the chin, kind of tapering some of this up a little bit more, so it's a little bit more chiseled, would help as well. So finding opportunities like that on the face, I think would be really good. Find those angular planes that you can really emphasize that push the character. And then the other thing too that I would call out is right now the eyebrows, where you have them, it's good to see that you are getting those in place, but they're very kind of straight. That they're not that wonky, I promise. But if we look up here, there's a lot of attitude in these eyebrows. There's a lot of like angularity to them. So the more that you can push that on here, the more character that she's going to start to have. Obviously, you don't want to have like too much of an expression, but just pushing that direction or that angle of the eyebrows will really help. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, so this one, the comment was, let's see, where was I? Going for a Breaking Bad type of character inspired by the Salamancas. My idea is create a vibe of the Dons and make him fit into the Mexican gangster-like feel. The elements I would like to go with are on my reference board: a leather coat on top and top with the hat and those boots. Okay, cool. So currently, I don't have too much that I feel like I can really provide feedback on just in terms of the overall character, because at this point, I would say block all of that stuff in, because right now we have the outfit, which is looking fine, marvelous wise. I would say aside from that, this guy just kind of looks like Joe Schmo, in his work outfit and his button-up shirt, mainly because there's not any other elements to it. So what I would recommend doing is, get this in a decent state, bring it in here just so you can have it as a proxy essentially, and then I would start building the other elements in so that you could really start to figure out what this character is going to look like. You know, get his boots on here, figure out if you're going to get him like a chain or whatever it is, and then get his big top hat on him, which I know, you know, it's a cowboy hat, but get his big cowboy hat on here, whatever, you know, whatever you need to do, but just so that you can start to really feel out the character. And because without all that stuff, like I said, right now there's not really too much to give feedback on aside from the sim looks fine. I can tell you, me personally, when I do a sim in Marvelous, I just use this as a starting point, and I pretty much sculpt over the Marvelous sim after the fact. But this looks good to me. Kind of feels the vibe of what I'm seeing here. One thing that I would probably go for is, I think, you know, like kind of the deep unbuttoned shirt gives me that kind of uncle at the reunion sort of vibe. That's feels like he's too cool for everyone. He's very relaxed. I would implement things like that. But yeah, overall, that's kind of the main thing, just getting everything else in here. In terms of the anatomy, looks fine. Looks like it would do the job. Something else to consider is, again, right now, I think this guy feels very Joe Schmo, you know, feels very regular. Maybe it's an opportunity to come in and play up his anatomy. He's got like a beer gut or something, you know, he's obviously has lots of money. He's eating well, whatever, try and tell a story with it that way, however you want to. And I think that would help. Now, in terms of the face, just big thing is still asymmetric, or it's still symmetrical. So you'll want to break that up in the long run. But yeah, not too much feedback aside from that. I think it's really early, so I can't provide too much that I would do on it at this point. So let me take a quick drink of water. Hopefully everyone's having a good night, maybe learning something new, maybe not, I don't know, but I do hope that you guys are getting something out of this. So for our next one, let's see, what was the notes? Hi Jared, just finished baking this one. Now I'm struggling with the textures as I've never textured before. This is just a few smart materials from Substance I threw on there. Nothing I did myself. Really wish you could give me some north on this. Thank you very much. Okay, so if you've never textured before, what I would recommend doing is, man, that's tough. Starting from the ground up, there's a lot that you should know about texturing. The first thing is texturing and throwing smart materials on it and calling it a day. That's not how we texture, right? So when texturing, I texture the same way that I sculpt, right? And what that is it's breaking things down from a primary state to a secondary state to a tertiary state. So I do primary, which is going to be essentially my color block out. My secondary is going to be my color variation and breakup. So usually that includes like my roughness map and stuff like that. And then my third pass is going to be my tertiary, which is going to be like all of the storytelling details. Telling details. So what you've done at this point is you've done this, which that is essentially the first step of establishing your textures. You are putting metal where metal is supposed to be, you're putting bone where bone's supposed to be, and then you called it a day. So what you need to do is you need to first start out by establishing your color block out. What that means is establishing your colors. This concept or this character is not a great representation of understanding color, because everything, and we'll show this as an example, is going to be in this lower quadrant of our textures. The highest peak value that we're going to get is right there. and that is about halfway up on the value scale. So everything else is teeny, teeny, tiny, moving around very, very little. So you're not really getting much value structure in your character because of that. That's fine, but it's definitely going to make your job a little bit harder. Now, when texturing, like I said, the first thing that I do is block out my colors, which essentially what you did here. But then I would move into my color variation and breakup. So because this is metal, I would start overlaying, oranges, blues, different color variation and value variation in order to build up something a little bit more complex. I would also build up my roughness map in order to break up the highlights. I would do the same thing for the bones, this stuff. Now, one thing that I would say is at this point, I think that currently what we have right now, your model is not helping as much as it should for a texture project like this. There is a lot of detail missing to kind of flat surfaces. So a model or a character like this, because it's so simple, your texturing is only going to get you so far. You can get a decent amount of the way there, but you're going to have a really, really strong sculpt in order to get you there. Now, if we look at like a lot of what's going on here, there is not really much secondary form. There's kind of just primary form with like couple of divots and then like kind of these little lines here. It kind of seems like there was no interpretation between your like what is shown here as a primary form and like filling in the gaps with those secondary forms. That is what would ultimately probably help this texture come to life a little bit more. You can see here in the hands, because there is, these extra elements of the tendons and the wraps and kind of these little like cavities and things like that, the texture or the surface detail is doing a lot more lifting. Whereas, like if we look up here on the head, there's virtually no secondary forms on here. It's kind of just a flat skull with like a couple of small forms in here. There's some, kind of breakup to some of these forms, but there isn't enough in between to really kind of pull that information and use it in your texturing. So what I would recommend doing is I would take this guy and I would go back and do another pass at the secondary forms. That's going to give you a lot more information in your textures to start using. So you're going to take this kind of gray color smart material and you're going to use that as your block out. And then you are going to come in and start adding color variation, start painting in value, whether it be highlights or like, where dirt and grunge and grime build up, kind of looks like we might have a little bit in here on these areas, but you're going to have to go through and just start manually painting in some of that stuff and then use your generators to add edge wear and things like that. So overall, I think just on a fundamental level, there are some of those things that we're missing that would really help. Same thing even with like down here on the armor and stuff. We have the shape of this guy, but we don't have any variation to it, right? So we don't have like any big dents or dings. It kind of just seems like we have the basic shape and we're missing that in between and the tertiary level on it, right? So that's what I would recommend doing. If you are interested in learning more about texturing, I can tell you that I do have a video that's coming out this week, I think is when I'm going to release it, which kind of talks about these three subjects in more in depth. It's kind of breaking down my process and it dives a little bit deeper into it. So definitely give that a watch once it comes out. Like I said, I'm probably going to release it next Monday. And that'll be a good, hopefully learning opportunity for you or for anyone else who is curious about texturing, because texturing is one of those things that it's not widely accessible in terms of the information that's out there on YouTube. Most of the time, if you like search texturing, it's people texturing in Blender, people, the Substance Painter YouTube channel, things like that. But there's not a lot of people that really teach it. So that's I think part of why I try to put more information out there about it because it's something that I feel like, I'm passionate about and I enjoy, and hopefully is a market that I can fill. Let's see. Yeah, I skipped some of the high poly because I didn't know what to do. Now I don't know what to do on the textures. We'll go back and figure it out better. Yeah, this is a prime example of, don't look at a model and think, oh, well, I could just do that in texture, or I could make the detail in texture. This is the prime example where like there are things that you just need to give a sculpting pass inside of ZBrush or wherever to fill in a lot of those details and get you something that looks like what it's supposed to. This is not something that I would like do a quick model on and then texture to kind of fill in the gaps. So that's what I would recommend. But hopefully that helps give you a little bit more direction. Let's see. Okay, so for this guy, so main feedback that I have on this guy is primarily going to be, again, with some anatomy stuff. We have the Michelin Man arm shapes, the kind of just roundedness to them. And then we have the roundedness of the chest, and we do have some definition here on the shoulders, but I would really look at the anatomy and how the forms overlap for the biceps, because right now we are just creating these forms, right? And so we're missing the outside of the tricep. Geez, had an aneurysm there. The outside of the tricep head and how that forms down into the bicep. So from the front perspective, you are going to see the tricep on down here and up here. And then you will see a little bit of the plane of the bicep down at this point. So give the biceps another pass, and really just take a look at an anatomy model and see how you can kind of work that silhouette out a little bit better. From the concept, one thing that is standing out to me is this strap. It seems like it was just added. I don't really see much of a reason for it or what it's doing. It just kind of feels like it's jammed down into the pants. I would get rid of that. I don't think it's necessary. Feels like an addition of something that isn't probably needed. Same thing with, like, I see this sword on here. This is a weird choice for putting a sword on the front side, like facing this direction. I personally would probably like find a way to angle it a little bit differently, but I guess it's nice because it does break the silhouette. I don't know. It's a little bit of a weird design choice on that one, in my opinion. But there's also seems to be a couple of elements on here that, interpreted because the fact that this is all just brush strokes, so there's not too much to interpret on it. I think they're fine. I don't know if I have too much opinion on them. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's kind of the main feedback on the costume. Down here, I probably would just kind of push these maybe a little bit more to give them some more character. Excuse me. Let's see. Now for the face, I do have some feedback on this. I think one of the big things is we're starting to get kind of a cone head, because this guy is so lacking of hair, or probably has thin hair. I would just make sure to, get that cranium represented in there a little bit more accurately. This line really, really sharp all the way down, so I would make sure to blend and blur that out. Also with this guy, it feels like because we have the beard, we are lacking in the shape of the head. Like his muzzle might be a little bit too short or something, or maybe the eyes are a little bit too big. Something scale wise is kind of throwing me off. And I think it has to do with because we have like this beard, it's masking and obscuring the jawline. So that's like kind of making the face a little bit looks proportionally correct, but in reality, this jaw might be a little bit too small and the eyes might be a little bit too big. So I might shrink those like 5 to 10%. I think it's the eye size is probably what it is. But also we have like the edge of the eye coming to almost right here. So yeah, I would say that probably the eye size needs to be a little bit smaller. Let's do this. Just because this angle is kind of throwing things off, it would be easier to check this in actual 3D. But yeah, I think part of it is just how wide the cheekbones were. It was kind of really widening the eyes a little bit. The again, I would have to see this from the front perspective. It's kind of hard to tell here because there's like shadows and stuff, but this corner of the eye might also need to be moved in as well to line up with the corner of the nose so that this corner is lining up down here with that corner. Yeah, and then just again the getting some asymmetry in there. This guy's an old guy, he shouldn't be symmetrical. You know, you need to get some really kind of carved in shapes and some of these wrinkle lines, but not having everything exactly symmetrical on both sides. And then even, you know, give him a little bit of a crooked nose or something so he doesn't feel quite as perfect. Where did you post for saying you were reviewing work in progress? I didn't see it. Yeah, so this one, so let me explain. I was planning on doing a work in progress review a couple of weeks ago. I had some personal stuff come up that kind of knocked me out of commission for like 2 weeks. So I said I was gonna make this up, and you know I had the opportunity to tonight. So I posted about it on the Discord this morning in the work in progress channel. So I didn't publicly put this out on Instagram or anything like that. So that was again just kind of a last minute thing. So I do apologize if you were not able to participate or see it. But yeah, if you are not a part of the Discord, that's where I usually make most of my announcements. And if I make them on my Instagram, great, but I don't always make them on Instagram. So, but I try to. Okay, so this one had two things. Is there a reason for the strap on the back side? If there is a strap, it's holding an axe. I still doesn't. I would get rid of it. I don't think it made much sense. I would strap the axe to something else, but that's just again, that's just the subjective opinion that I have. It just kind of feels like it was stuck in there, and it doesn't really feel like it was part of the design, which when you look at the concept, it wasn't initially. So that's kind of my opinion on it. Again, if you feel like it is justified, it's totally fine. But I just felt like it felt a little bit odd. Okay, so let's see for our last one. Looking for a bit of feedback on two character models I'm doing at the moment, mostly anatomy as they don't have much armor or cloth yet. One is the centaur and the other is an orc. Would love to hear feedback. Thank you. Okay, cool. So for the centaur, looks pretty cool. I think the anatomy looks pretty believable right off the bat. I think the biggest thing standing out to me is this feels like a very, very, you know, like a, a mini horse, you know, like these legs feel really, really short. Part of that I think is because of the muscularity of him. But his these legs are feeling short, and then these arms are so bulky that they're also feeling really short. So I think you probably could, depending on like the concept or whatever, if you're trying to make this like a little bit more accurate, probably lengthening up the horse legs like 5 to 10%, and then lengthening up his arms like another 5 to 10%. Proportionally, I think would feel a little less like he kind of feels like a dwarf horse, right? You know, like he's got that really short, stocky build, but also the horse body also has that short and stocky build. But overall, anatomy I think looks pretty believable. You know, the forearms are looking solid. I think these are looking really good, and you know, overall anatomy is looking pretty cool. Anatomy here on this guy, same thing. I think looks pretty good. Think the forearms looking pretty nice. Yeah, overall I think this is looking pretty cool. And then for this guy, I think the biggest thing is he's a goblin, orc, whatever he is. Face feels really, really symmetrical. All of these lines kind of feel the exact same on both sides, even though there probably is a little bit of asymmetry in there. You know, I can see the teeth are asymmetrical just because there's this little tooth there, but aside from that, they feel very symmetrical. So I would push that a little bit further. I probably would also try and like chisel some of these planes out a little bit more to really kind of emphasize some of the look that this guy has. Let's see, how does that look? Yeah, just some subtle stuff in here to kind of push that silhouette a little bit more. And then even same thing probably with like the tooth, getting it a little bit further away maybe, but maybe not. I don't know. Might be able to play with that one. But I think that that's kind of the main feedback on this guy, just really getting some of that symmetry in there. Excuse me, asymmetry, not symmetry. And kind of just pushing that silhouette a little bit more, some of that angularity in there, make him feel really grumpy. In terms of the forms, overall is feeling pretty good. I would probably give the eye bags another pass, and like the eye shape. It feels very soft in a lot of areas. Like this form just kind of like rolls into this form, and you know, everything's feeling very pillowy. Again, get in there and really kind of build some structure to some of these folds and things like that, and define some of these line changes and these plane changes and stuff. And I think that that would help a lot for this guy. So yeah, that's kind of my main feedback with it. Overall, sculpting's looking pretty good. Just, you know, keep pushing it further, and I think it'll be in a good direction. Let's see. I don't think I really missed any comments, because I think most of it just had to do with what I was saying. But I think that that just brings us to the end of the work in progress feedback. I'm sorry if I just clapped loud into the headset. But thank you guys for coming, hanging out, watching the work in progress feedback, submitting your stuff. Hopefully I can do more of these in the future. Hopefully this weekend I'll get back to some sculpting on stream and stuff. Like I said, I was dealing with some personal stuff that knocked me out for a little while, but I'm doing better, which is good, and hopefully I can get back to streaming. But one thing I did want to let you guys know, sorry, give me 1 second. One thing I did want to let you guys know is that if you hadn't seen already, I did put out my texturing course on my ArtStation store. If you're interested in that, make sure to check it out. It is actually currently on sale, so probably the best time to buy it if it's something that you're interested in. If you were looking at taking my texturing course in the past, all of those videos are up and available for you guys now as an opportunity to check those out. Aside from that, thank you guys for the support. As always, I always appreciate it. I'm always glad to hang out and talk and, look at art and talk about it and blabber for a while. So hopefully you guys found this informative and useful, and I will see you guys in the next one. Okay. Later, guys.